Hello everyone and welcome back to those of you who joined us this morning. Welcome back to the afternoon session of the Intercultural Cities Australasia Summit. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Councillor Belinda Coates and I chair our City of Ballarat Intercultural Advisory Committee and co-chair our Koori Engagement Action Group. This morning we had a beautiful welcome to country from Dr. Deanne Gilson, who's a proud Wadawurrung woman, and I'll acknowledge we're regathering on Wadawurrung country here and acknowledge all First Nations peoples and our ongoing connection to country, to land and to the environment and each other, and the beautiful stories we had this morning, Deanne's presentation, even the beautiful music from Kinja, Ron and Sarah, it really just reminded us that we are all one, we're all connected to each other and the environment that we're dependent on the air and the water and the land, every element of it. Welcome to our viewers who are tuning in from all around the globe. It's amazing to be able to do this. Technology is pretty incredible, and that also reminds us of how connected we are to each other. This afternoon we've got the beautiful pleasure of having Anindita Banerjee with us. She is twice uprooted Indian and an interdisciplinary artist researcher. Met Anindita recently a few months ago when she participated in a beautiful exhibition that we had as part of our UNESCO City of Craft and Folk Art at the Mining Exchange, and saw some of her beautiful work, so I'm really looking forward to seeing more of it this afternoon. Her research interests includes cultural otherness, authentic identity and the sense of home. Through her work, she challenges the notion of fitting into sociocultural spaces literally and metaphorically. Anindita currently has an exhibition here at Art Gallery of Ballarat, and she'll share some information about that and some stories about that shortly, and it's a real pleasure to have her with us today. Please make her very, very welcome.
Thank you very much for your warm welcome. Namaskar. My name is Anindita Banerjee. What I said just then was, hello, my name is Anindita Banerjee. Before I start talking about the exhibition and things and stories that I want to share with you today, I would really like to begin by acknowledging the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation, the original custodians of these lands on which I work and play, and I am tuning in from today. I pay my sincere respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and I would like to extend my acknowledgement and respect to the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Islander peoples. I would like to extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal people that are present with us here today. And before we start talking more, I would just like to say that when I say these words, when I do an acknowledgement, I feel it really, really deeply and personally. And that is because when I moved to moved to Australia about 11 years ago now, it took me a very long time, about 3 to 4 years, to actually understand what acknowledgement of country meant. So I used to go to these meetings, I used to go to these gatherings, and people would acknowledge country. And it took me about 3 or 4 years of talking to people and of sharing stories and listening to others talk about what it meant to actually understand what it is, and then gather the courage to do an acknowledgement myself. And a few years ago, I spent a lot of time doing that, like thinking about what it means to me. And then I had done a performance work, which was my personal acknowledgement of country, and it's there on my website. But I shall not talk about that today. I shall actually talk about an exhibition that is now currently showing in this gallery over here. And I thought I'd just share the story of how that exhibition came into place, because a lot of that is about me finding a sense of belonging, or me finding a sense of place in my home, in my new home now in Ballarat. So my voice is a bit shaky there, and that happens to me every time I come out and speak in front of public, but I'm sure it'll settle down in a little bit. So what's written on that screen over there is Andor Mohol. It's in Bengali script. And what it means is basically the inner or the private areas of a house, referencing both to the physical inner spaces of a home and also the hidden spaces of the mind. Okay, I have gone too far. I am on the other side. Okay. I'm giving away my presentation without even talking about it. Okay, I should have practiced that before, and it's just skipping that one. Okay. Finally, sorry for that. So I visited Ballarat for the first time in 2016, and this was 6 years after I had moved to Australia. So when I was walking down the streets of Ballarat, there was this strange sense of time travel that sort of came and hit me. It was as if I had moved, like I was moving front and back, like in that timeline. And that was, I think, that was because of the multiple similarities that Ballarat or the cityscape of Ballarat has to where I have grown up. I've grown up in North Calcutta in India. For me, it was like I was jumping from 2020s Ballarat to 1990s Kolkata when I was growing up. But then the sense of time travel came when I looked at these buildings, and these buildings are really looked after and well kept over here. But where I was growing up in India, these colonial buildings, they are crumbling down now, and they are not in that, they don't look new anymore. So it sort of made me think of 1920s Kolkata, when all of those buildings were really new. And then I came to think of, maybe when I walk down these streets of Ballarat and look at these buildings, if I walked into one of those buildings, maybe I would just all of a sudden meet a character from Rabindranath Tagore's novels. And then it also made me think of things like so Rabindranath Tagore is a very well-known writer that wrote during that era, pre-colonial era of Kolkata. And then many of his stories were made into films in the 1970s. So these were all of these different timelines that was going on in my mind while I was spending my initial few days walking down the streets of Ballarat. And just to give you a sense of it, the slide that we are looking at now on the top left is a bandstand which is there at the Eden Gardens in Kolkata. And the bottom bandstand is on Arstad Street. And the image on the right I'm not going to talk about now, but I'm going to talk about it in a little bit. Around the same time, I happened to inherit an antique embroidery that was given to me by a great aunt. So my great aunt had passed away, and his son, my uncle, gave it to me thinking that I would be able to do something with it. So it was a really frayed piece of embroidery, but the lettering over there in the middle says Ma, which means mother. So looking at that, and it's a very interesting piece of embroidery because it has the Edwardian beading style in it, and the flowers on the right are a mix of flora and fauna from Kolkata and like tropical seasons in Kolkata and also spring in England. So there was this mix of things in this embroidery. So it was this cityscape of Ballarat that reminded me of all these things, together with this antique embroidery that made me think of this exhibition called Andor Mohol. So thinking of all of those things, the first thing that I did was I did a full day photo shoot in one of the gardens over here called the Victoria Gardens. And we spent about, so that's me and my daughter in that photograph, and we spent a whole day doing a photo shoot over there. And we ended up creating about 280 usable photographs. And when I say usable photographs, that means that we had created maybe 2,000 photographs and shortlisted it to 280. And what I did after that was I sort of spent the next 4 or 5 days just looking through those photographs and looking at them and thinking of how these photographs, or how I'm going to say this whole story, this whole story of the timeline, of all the things that I'm thinking about through my photographs. How am I going to convey that message? So it was quite a thought process, really. And as many artists would agree with me, that what happens while we are doing this sort of a meditation and thinking, there comes a moment when something clicks and things just fall into place. So thinking about it, what I got reminded of was the Alpona. So this is a drawing made with rice flour and water, and it's a very traditional drawing that in Bengali it is called Alpona, but many parts of India and many parts of South Asia actually do this kind of drawing, and they have their own little techniques of doing it. So, and there are lots of different names for it. So this drawing is it's a very integral part of our lives. So it's not a formal learning that we are taught, or it's just something that we learn growing up. We see our grandmothers, we see our mothers doing it, we see them doing it on special occasions, and we just learn it. It's just an embodied knowledge that we gather. So, and I often use the Alpona in my art making as a metaphor of my identity, and as a metaphor of where I have come from and where I'm wanting to go. So it is almost like an expression that I used to say a lot of different things. So the thought came to my mind that I've got to use that in some way. But at the same time, I'm also thinking of things like, I am on this land, which is, I'm questioning my presence on this land as well. So, I'm a guest on these lands. Am I an unwanted guest? Am I an uninvited guest? Have I, by, buying house here, or by buying a plot of land over here, am I just subscribing to colonialism again? So all of these questions, how do I, things like how do I make my presence on these lands, like how do I tread softly on these lands? How do I live on these lands in a way where I'm respectful and I acknowledge what has actually happened over here? So anyway, all of those things in the mind, I thought, okay, let's do a little bit of experimentation. And then that previous image, this is what I got to. So I thought that maybe I should, take that image and put an Alpona on it and see what happens. So did that experimentation, and it was like 2 o'clock in the night. So you can tell that, see, some of these are not really the best drawings. But somehow when I went and then did better on this, it just didn't work anymore. Like somehow that worked for me. Anyway, so that's when I got to that drawing, and that was me and my daughter in Victoria Gardens. So Victoria Gardens is very much like Gorer Mat, which is a garden in Kolkata. And I thought that, maybe we should set up a story like this where these two people, or more than two people maybe, these women, they just exist here. Like, we're not doing a lot of things to say that, okay, we belong here or we don't belong here, or those kinds of things. Maybe I should think of it in such a way that we just exist, we just dwell here. And then the Alpona can maybe say the story. So then I started extending on that storyline a bit and came up with things like this. So, and this. And that. So the other thing that I also think about while making work, or while doing my research, is I set myself some constraints sometimes. So constraints in the sense, constraints that I have grown up thinking about. Say, for example, there's this concept of the Pancha Mahabhuta, which is basically the 5 elements. And somehow, that's another thing. Like I was speaking about the Alpona, the Pancha Mahabhuta is yet another concept like that, which wasn't taught to us formally. It was just something that we learned through conversations at home, through growing up, through doing things. And it is the easiest way to explain that is it's a structure of 5 elements through which we understand the universe. So, and that's why while doing these images, I thought of things like the water, the air, the land, etc. But also, there is another underlying story that hopefully I will be able to build at some time. There were 5 people involved in this project that I was doing, and all of these 5 women are of different ages, but they are all Bengali women. And they have all migrated to Australia at different times. So different times in the linear timeline, and also different times in their lives. So somebody has come here when they were 2 years old, while others have come here when they were in their late 40s. Somebody has come here in the 1960s, whereas somebody has come last year. So there's this, 5 women that have migrated to India. They have all, migrated to Australia from India. 5 Bengali women from India and Bangladesh. And they have a similar sort of a background, but they have all come here at different times. So, just comparing their migration stories. So that's another narrative that might come out of this research. But at this stage, this is where it is at. And then, the photo montage that I showed you earlier. This shot on the right is part of another photograph. So I just played with a little bit, and I thought it would be smart to trick you guys. But that's just another image that is part of this exhibition, and we clicked it at the Sturt Street bandstand. So while I was thinking of how we are going to make while I was thinking about the content of the exhibition and what kind of narrative that it would be and what is the story that I'm going to say, we also think of, as artists, we also think of what the presentation is going to be and how that presentation is going to add to the narrative. So my thoughts were that I don't want to have photographs on the wall. Instead, maybe we could, and this was, instead maybe we could do something which is a little bit different. Maybe we could do something which also has another story to say. There is another materiality to it. And several conversations with my good friend and my curator, and the curator of this exhibition, Julie, we had lots of long conversation as to what we could do. And finally, we settled on something called a piri. So a piri is basically a low stool, and it is a very versatile thing and a very domestic thing that is there in every Southeast Asian homes, especially in Bengali homes. And it is something that has lots of different uses. So, we'll sometimes use it for simple things like serving food on, or sitting on it or standing on it to get something from the top, just like we would use small stools here in the kitchen. And other times, a more decorated version like this one would be used for offerings and prayers and things like that. So I thought that maybe it'll be a good idea if I could take those images and print them on piris, and that way, there is another narrative to it. There is another materiality added to that. So they then began this big process of making those piris and printing on the wood and things like that. And ultimately, hopefully, you'll get to see that exhibition after this talk. But that is what it looks like in the space, where there is a set of 8 images printed on these low piris. And all of these images, like I gave a few examples earlier, all of these spaces are in Ballarat, and they're all public places in Ballarat. So when you look at the photographs, hopefully, the sense was that maybe you could not tell whether it is Ballarat or it is some other colonial city from the world, or it is Kolkata. But when you look closely enough, there are hints that it is in Ballarat indeed, and it is in 2020. You'll find little things in there which gives away the fact that it was clicked this year, it was made this year and not made in 1920s. And then came the Lindsay family sitting room. So we thought Julie and myself, we thought that maybe it'll be a good idea to extend that narrative and do something else with this exhibition. And actually, in some aspects, the exhibition was an extension of the initial installation that we were thinking to do at the Lindsay's gallery, Lindsay sitting room. And what happens in projects like this is there are so many discussions that happen that the timeline is lost at some stage. But anyway, so we thought that we should do something in the Lindsay family sitting room. So it is usually a sitting room over there. But then, because there is this underlying narrative that is about these women, these 5 women, Bengali women that have migrated to India, I sort of set up that the narrative around the sitting room to be the room of a young girl that lived in one of those Rajbaris or those mansions of the colonial era. So, and this little girl has a lot of, she's a little bit different from the rest of her family, and she does a lot of different things that people maybe did not quite encourage young women to do at that time. So she used to write music, she used to play music, write poetry, maybe spend her time reading sometimes, so doing some embroidery, etc. So I tried to do the installation in such a way that it looks as if the room is not quite perfect, there are things here and there, and as if this young girl is actually sitting behind those curtains and humming to herself, because she's had just enough of that embroidery, and she doesn't feel like writing anymore, and maybe she's just had a nap and she doesn't want a nap anymore. So she's just sitting behind those curtains and just humming to herself. And this is yet another attempt of going back to that narrative of these young women, or of these women just dwelling in this place and not really wanting to establish something by living here, but just, doing their regular thing, living their regular life in this space. Now, the interesting thing, so this one, as you can tell, this is the installation, and that image on the left, that is an image from, it's a still from a movie that was made in 1970s, 1980s, actually, late 70s, of the story that I was talking about earlier, when I was saying that Rabindranath Tagore's stories were made into movies. So why I thought I'd include that image in there is because maybe, I thought to myself, maybe a lot of what I imagine 1920s was, and what women looked like around that time and what they used to do around that time, was my understanding through the books that I read and how they were interpreted by movie makers in the 1970s. So there really is, there's this question of originality over there as well. So what I am imagining as what 1920s was really what the filmmaker in 1970 has taught me to imagine, possibly. So there's all these questions around that arises when we do something like this. But the other thing which was very interesting that I sort of came to, and this was the first time in my research career that I actually confronted this, is the fact that it is so difficult to be bilingual, in the sense that, sometimes I'm thinking in Bengali, and I can say what I'm thinking in Bengali, but when I'm trying to translate that to English, I just lose it. And other times I have thought of something or I've written something in English, and then I'm trying to explain it in Bengali to somebody else, maybe to my auntie in India, and I've lost it. So this came out more when I was trying to find names for all of these photographs that we created. So while we were, one evening, me and my husband, we were, thinking of, what I could, because naming really, for me as an artist, it's possibly the most difficult part of the whole thing, because you've done everything and then all of a sudden you have to find 4 words that describes a piece of work. Anyway, so one evening we were just discussing this, and then magically one of Rabindranath Tagore's songs, just, every line of that song seemed to just magically fit every photograph that I had made. So we thought, I thought that maybe I can use that song, give Rabindranath Tagore his credit, of course, and then, use some of those phrases. So the Bengali part of writing these was done. And then came the difficult part. I had to translate those words into, those lines into English. And that really, it was really hard to translate some of those feelings and not make it cheesy. So I'm not saying the lines that I've written in English are not cheesy. They still might be quite cheesy, but it was just a really hard exercise to do. Anyway, so that brings me to the end of my presentation, but I thought I'd end with a story. You know how things sometimes are just meant to be, and there are coincidences that happen. So this song that I'm talking about, the Balash Dine Sheshe Ghumer Deshe. So this song was written in 1911, and the music was given much later. So Rabindranath Tagore had given the initial tune to it, but it was made into a song much later. And then it was used in a movie in the 1970s. And guess what the name of that movie was? It was Anindita. So it was just one of those things that was just meant to be. It was like a full circle. I didn't know that until I had done that research and I had used that song and things like that. And then I realized, okay, that was really meant to be. So yeah, that's my story of making Andor Mahal, and you can see the exhibition in real life 2 doors down, I think. Or 2, is it called 2 doors down? I'm not sure. 4? Okay, Julie's telling me 4 from there. But yeah, that's where you can see it. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anindita. That was beautiful storytelling, actually, and thanks so much for joining us and your fabulous work. I just really enjoyed listening to all of that, and that concept of time travel and the concept of time and place and culture and language and everything being connected really weaves on so well from what we've covered this morning too. Yeah, and I love the serendipity at the end. The synchronicity is really fabulous. So really looking forward to seeing your work. And we've been joined by the curator Julie McLaren as well, who's going to give us a bit of a tour for people who would like to join. But please join me in giving Anindita another huge round of applause. Okay. All right. We do. I've just heard we've got time for a couple of questions. So would anyone like to ask a question of Anindita? Yes, Nikki.
Anindita, absolutely love every bit of your story. And as an Aboriginal person, I absolutely want to acknowledge your acknowledgement first and foremost. It was absolutely beautiful, and thank you for it. And the story that we talk about is, when you do an acknowledgement, it is give a bit about yourself. And you did that perfectly well. You did a really beautiful job of the acknowledgement. And the question, and the question you have, if you are welcomed here on country, as an Aboriginal person, you're most certainly welcome, and don't feel like, do not ever feel like that you're not. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's beautiful.
Any other questions from the floor? Oh, yeah. Son, I'll bring the mic out for you.
Thank you for sharing your story. It was beautiful. I just wanted to ask you that what is next?
Thank you very much for asking me that, because the next slide was meant to be next year. And I, of course, in that I forgot to talk about that. So this project, I have set it up as a 3 years to 4 years long project, in the sense that I want to research a little bit more and make more work around this. What we are going to do next year is, all the 5 people that were involved as characters this year, the 5 women that I've been talking about, they are all going to respond to the theme as artists next year. And we are going to have an exhibition in the city of Melbourne, where these 5 artists, including me, are going to make work in response to the theme of Andar Mohol. And these 5 people are, there is a published writer that writes in Bengali. There is a dancer that is doing research in dance at this stage, in classical Indian dance. There is a singer that is a specialist in Nazrul Giti, and there is a young artist as well. So there's the 5 of us that are going to respond to the theme next year. But I don't know what I'm going to do the year after on the theme yet.
Easier with the mask out. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. I'm fascinated by language and culture, and you're bilingual, for which I really envy you. But I'd like to hear some insights into the differences in living in the 2 cultures, the 2 languages, in the way that not only you think, but also the way things like emotions play out and relationships. Any insights would be really very interesting.
That's a very interesting question, and what I would like to say to that is, in India, it is the colonial past in India has left such a mark that most of the official business that happens in India, whether it is in offices or in the courtroom or in schools and things like that, actually happens in English. And what that means is a lot of the traditional languages or the indigenous languages in India are being lost. I grew up in a missionary school in India, and I am quite ashamed of myself, really, sometimes, that I know, I have read English more than I have read Bengali. So I make a conscious effort to read things that I have not read as a young girl. So, stories written in Bangla, listen to music that was made in Bangla, etc. But thinking of living within the 2 cultures, there are, like I was saying before, there are lots of things. So I grew up speaking Bangla at home, which I'm really thankful for. And a lot of things that we speak about, or the context that is there, growing up in a country or growing up within the cultural context of a particular country, the songs we listen to, the jokes we make, are very different from over here. So often, I'll be in a situation where I'm with friends over here and they've made a joke, or which I don't get context to because I've not grown up here. But at the same time, my kids, I think they face the same thing, because they'll often be, when we adults have got friends over that are from Bengal, or we've got family friends over, we'll make a joke. They are in the same group, and we'll make a joke that they'll not have any context to. So there's this constant gap of loss of context, but it's something. It's not specific to me. I would think it's such a universal thing. Any migrant would possibly relate to that. Growing up in a country in a different context and then living in a context here. And I always wonder what it's going to be like for the next generation. So yeah, I'm not sure whether I've answered your question, but those were the thoughts that got intrigued by that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
A question from Shirley over here.
Thank you. My name is Shirley. It's not a question, but it's just rather a very impressive presentation. It's very, very good. I'm not much of an artist, but listening for what you're saying, you are just connecting the past, the present, and now somebody's asking the future. What would be comes up with the future generation? Seeing all your works with that, and you're connecting with that. So it's a visualizing and inspiring us to do something amongst all of us as a one community, because we are trying to create something that we can reflect on us as one community, you know, like garden, and we've been working for that, and now we have seen something like that. It's something that visualizing us, oh, that's good, so we can apply that. So hopefully it will work, you know, from today that we heard from you. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Shelley,
Thank you.
any final questions before we get to go on the tour? Oh, Belinda. Oh, and HP, I'll just...
All right. Thank you very much again. I think echoing everybody else's, it was a wonderful presentation. I'm just curious, you mentioned cheesy, and I'm very curious to see, I'm looking at that and I'm wondering what it says, but I'm wondering if you can pick just a specific sentence of that prose that you pointed out there and translate it for us so we can sort of get an inkling of the language that's in there.
Sure. I'm going to try and translate it. Like I had said before, I'm really bad at translating, so please bear with me. So the first two lines are, Dine sheshe ghumer deshe, ghomta pora oi chhaya, bholalo re bholalo mor pran. So Dine sheshe ghumer deshe means towards the end of the day when slumber arrives. Ghomta pora oi chhaya. This part is really difficult to translate because ghomta means, you know, when we wear saris and sometimes we put the sari over our heads, that's called ghomta. So ghomta pora oi chhaya, as if somebody has got that veil over their head and is waiting in the shadow. Bholalo re bholalo mor pran. So that thought of being in that evening towards slumber, and this person, as if that person is standing in the shadow, and bholalo, like it is making me forget everything else, and it is soothing my soul. So yeah, that's two lines there, and I said a paragraph there, but I don't think I've still got it. But
Great question. Thanks for that.
thanks.
Belinda, sorry.
I can wrap it up if you like, John. That was a good question, actually, and it was probably more poetic than cheesy, I think, the response. My question, Anindita, and I can ask it informally as we're wandering around later as well, but I was really curious about the coincidence and the serendipity, whether that's a common thing that you find in your work, or whether that one really stands out as being incredibly unusual.
It is something, I'm glad you asked that question, Belinda. It is something that has happened to me multiple times in my life, whether it is in relation to work or it is in relation to just life in general. But often, you know, we don't understand it while it is happening, but on hindsight, later on we understand. And I'll give one more example on that. So when we first moved to Ballarat, I had lived in the west of Melbourne for years before that. So I had a friends group there. When I moved here, I didn't have anybody. And the first day when the kids had gone off to school, and I was not working at that stage, I was having a morning which was quite ordinary and I was feeling quite flat. So I came to the Collins bookstore over here. And I do that. It's one of my guilty pleasures. I just buy stationery. Anyway, so I just bought myself a beautiful little diary that day. And the diary said Venice mornings. I didn't pay any attention to that at that stage. Much later, a year later, I got invited to do an exhibition in Venice. So this is just a small story, but then lots of things like that have actually happened in my life. So serendipity is quite a thing. And I think if all of us are mindful about things that we have done or things that have happened, we can always consciously find those links. Maybe I look for those links more consciously, and that's why I find them. But yeah, it has happened many times.
That's really interesting. Thanks once again, Anindita. And please join me in giving a big round of applause and